Today's video is brought to you by creativesdothis.com. It started as a normal day. Summer exams. Blue skies over Sussex. Nothing seemed out of place. At 2 p.m, 15-year-old Brooklyn Bashford walked out of the school gates with his friends. He'd just finished one of his GCSE exams. At that point, he was thinking about the weekend. He didn't know this was about to become the worst day of his life. Then his phone buzzed. A text from a man that he trusted. It read, "Meet me at Costa." That man was Derek Martin, 67, a trusted family friend, someone who had been around for years, helping with the school run and fixing things around the house. Brooklyn called him Granddad Derek. He didn't question it, he just went. Inside the Costa Coffee in Peacehaven, Derek was already there. He was sitting with Brooklyn's two sisters and his little brother. Everyone was chatting away and laughing. It all seemed completely normal. But then Derek said something kind of odd. He told Brooklyn, "Your parents have had a big argument." Brooklyn thought it was strange, but he didn't press it. They kept on talking, football, weekend plans, nothing serious. Looking back, he says that Derek was calm, and that is something that would later only add to the horror. After they finished their drinks, Derek said that they should head home. He offered to drive them. The kids piled into the car, music on, windows down. But halfway there, Derek pulled into a Sainsbury's car park. He jumped out, ran around a corner, and then just came back seconds later. None of the kids knew why. Brooklyn remembered thinking that that was weird, but nothing more. Brooklyn's 12-year-old sister had been texting their parents all afternoon. "Are you mad with me?" she'd written. "Mum, please answer." But there would be no reply. After they left the Sainsbury's car park, Derek made yet another stop. He took the children to McDonald's. He bought them Happy Meals, talked about football once again, and Brooklyn said that it all felt normal. Derek was in good spirits, he was smiling and handing out the fries. But when one of the girls asked, "Where's Mum and Dad?" they said that Derek got snappy, and then he went quiet. They drove onwards, but not towards the kids' home in New Haven. Instead, he went on to Brighton, the place where Elaine, the children's grandmother, and Derek's ex-wife lived. He told Brooklyn to take the kids inside the home, whilst he drove around and found a parking spot. But Derek didn't come back. Instead, Elaine and her new husband were packing for the weekend, and they were totally shocked to see their grandchildren at their door. Confused and concerned, they called Derek, but they received no answer. By the way, this is Dark Case and you can call me Jack. I bring you rare and unseen true crime cases, as well as other things that you may later regret knowing, with multiple uploads every single week. I was just wondering if you could help me out quickly. Can you just make sure that you're subscribed and all notifications are turned on? Also hit like on the video if you appreciate what I'm doing here. And also answer this silly little question. If you could be born in any time period other than this one, what year would you pick and why? Let me know down in the comments. I just want to let you know that I'm trying something new for a few weeks, where Friday's video is a brand new case, followed by a recap of the other cases from this week. This is because I know only around 5% of my subscribers actually get notified of my new videos. I hope that makes sense, and I hope you enjoy this new format. Please do let me know what you think. But now, on with the video. At 6:11 p.m, a text message arrived to grandmother Elaine. It read, "I'm so sorry. I can't believe what I've done. Please look after the children. I'm just about to walk into the police station. Don't take them home." Brooklyn remembers that moment clearly. His grandmother's face went pale. The phone slipped from her hand. Minutes later, police cars arrived at the home. They took Elaine outside, and then Brooklyn heard her scream. "I started crying," he later said. "It's the worst feeling I've ever felt. My heart just dropped. In that moment, he understood. Whatever Derek had done, it was something they could never come back from. That morning had started totally normally, very possibly just like the morning that you had today. The Bashford household in New Haven was full of noise. Breakfast, school bags, shoes by the door. 30-year-old mother Chloe Bashford kissed her youngest goodbye. Her husband Josh, 33, left for work with a smile. Nothing seemed out of place, and just outside waiting was Derek Martin. He'd done the school run with them that morning, something that he often did. He'd really become part of their daily rhythm, that trusted extra set of hands. As we know, he had once been married to Chloe's mother, Elaine, but that was long before Chloe was even born. But in recent years, he drifted back into the family's lives. He was friendly and helpful, a man that was trying to rebuild family ties after years of trouble. Derek did have a past though, some small crimes, some time in prison for burglary and gambling debts. But Chloe had seen the good in him. She told friends that she wanted to help him out. But you know what they say, no good deed goes unpunished. This video is sponsored by Creatives Do This, a platform that I've helped to launch that features real interviews with real artists, candle makers, musicians and creatives of all kinds who are making it work. Right now we're looking for creatives to feature, so if you've made money from your creativity, whether it's a full-time career or a new side hustle, and you want to share how you did it, we'd love to hear your story. It's just a short text-based interview and it takes around 10 minutes. And in return you get free lifetime access to everything that the platform becomes. Plus your work will get featured to inspire others and to build your brand. Hit the link in the description or the pinned comment to take the quick interview and to become one of the 100 founding members. There's now less than 50 spaces left. www.creativesdothis.com. After dropping the kids off at school, Derek bought Chloe breakfast. They ate together, they talked about kids, they talked about money. And it was that last part that really mattered, because Derek once again owed money, and a lot of it. He had lent Chloe small amounts over the years, but now he said he needed it back, and he was really desperate. At first the conversation was calm, but it changed quickly. Chloe told him that she could give him something but not much. He'd been helping the family out a lot in recent months, and then Chloe said the words that prosecutors would later call the trigger, "Don't bother anymore." And that is when Derek snapped. He'd been cleaning the windows earlier that day, doing some odd jobs around the house. In fact, he still had a hammer in his hand. But in an instant, that tool became a weapon. A sudden burst of anger, strikes rained down. The damage done was horrifying. This one moment would destroy the worlds of many. Moments later, to make things even worse, he grabbed a sharp implement from the kitchen. That too now became a weapon. When it was all over, he stood alone in silence. Chloe's time on this earth had come to an end. Then, outside the family home, the sound of a car. Partner and father of the kids, Josh, was home early from work. Derek just lay in wait. When Josh stepped inside, Derek struck once again. The struggle moved through the house upstairs into the bedroom. And then, just moments later, it was all over. Yet, in another sense, it was only just starting for those left behind. Derek stood there, covered in red, in the home of two people that trusted him implicitly and had now paid the price. Across town, there were 4 children at school, waiting to be picked up. Instead of panicking, Derek started cleaning. He changed his clothes, he took down the Ring doorbell camera, and he moved the couple's car to a different road. It looked like nobody was home. Then he picked up Chloe's phone, he unlocked it, he read the messages from her daughter, and he even replied to one of them pretending to be Chloe. Every single one of his moves was cold and calculated, carried out purely for self-preservation at all costs. When police later reconstructed his steps, they said that it was clear. Derek had thought everything through. He wanted the children to believe that their parents were fine, at least for a few hours. He thought that that was all he needed, so that's exactly what he did. By the time school had ended, he was already at Costa, smiling, calm, waiting for the 4 kids who he knew would never see their parents ever again. When Derek Martin left the coffee shop that afternoon, he was playing a part. The doting grandfather, the man who always bought the kids a treat. Inside though, he knew exactly what he'd done, but on the outside, he was terrifyingly calm. Brooklyn remembers that afternoon feeling like a dream, but the kind that turns into a nightmare halfway through. When they drove away from the coffee shop, Brooklyn thought that they were heading home, but instead Derek pulled into the Sainsbury's car park in New Haven, and remember I said that he jumped out of the car and he jogged around the corner and disappeared for a few seconds, before then coming back pretending that nothing had happened. About this, Brooklyn said, "It was weird, but I didn't think too much of it." What he didn't know at that time was that Derek had just thrown his mother's phone into the bushes, trying to erase her even further. In the back seat of the car, his 12-year-old sister was growing more and more anxious. Most of her text messages to her mother were still unread. She desperately typed, "Mum, please answer. We're all worried sick." Of course, she would never get a reply. Her mother was no longer with us, and the phone was lying in the dirt 50 feet away. After that, they moved on to McDonald's in New Haven, Happy Meals, milkshakes, fries, and about this, Brooklyn later said, it still felt normal. But for the first time, he noticed something, a flicker, when his sister asked, "Where are Mum and Dad?" He said that Derek's voice changed, that his mask slipped for just a moment. And as we know, rather than going home, Brooklyn and his siblings were delivered to grandmother Elaine's house, where Derek stopped the car and he told Brooklyn, "Take the kids inside, I'll find a parking space." But that was just another lie. He didn't park up. He didn't come back. He was never going to. Instead, he drove a few streets away, parked down by the sea. He bought a beer, bought a packet of cigarettes, and then he sat on the beach watching the sun go down. Then at 7 p.m, Derek Martin walked into Brighton police station. Security cameras caught him walking in through the glass doors, still wearing that same calm face. He looked at the officer behind a desk and said quietly, "I've killed 2 people.
What's happened today? You've killed 2 people, okay. Do you suffer with any mental health? Can I just ask quickly?
A bit.
Sorry? A bit. What's that?
Sorry.
Okay. You got anything on you currently, apart from all that property? You got anything in your pockets? Do you mind just pulling out your pockets for me? What's that from? Knife. Have you got a knife on you? No. Right, so do you want to stand up for us? The time is now 7:12, okay? You're under arrest on the suspicion of murder times 2. You don't have to say anything, however, it may harm defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given as evidence. The reason for this is that you've stated you've murdered 2 people. Officers have attended your address and have found 2 bodies, okay? Necessity is for your arrest for a prompt and effective investigation via means of special warnings and a recorded interview, okay, and to prevent any further harm and your loss. You understand all that? Okay.
When police later interviewed him, his tone barely changed. He said, "I wanted to take the kids to McDonald's to have dinner. Then I wanted to take them home and look after them, but I couldn't."
First hit Chloe with a sledgehammer on the head.
He told detectives that he'd received text messages and phone calls from Brooklyn's 12-year-old sister whilst he was having his one last sit on the beach. She wanted to know where I was, he said. She wanted to go home. They didn't know what happened. Even in that moment, he was thinking about control, thinking about himself, wanting to dictate the ending to his story. But what happened wouldn't go the way that he planned, because when the trial began, he would claim that he hadn't meant to end them, that instead he'd simply just lost it, that he wasn't in his right mind, a claim that would divide psychiatrists and delay justice for over 2 years, infuriating and devastating 2 grieving families. This really should have been simple. 2 people no longer here, a confession from the man that had done it. It sounds open and shut, but it wasn't. For over 2 years, the case stalled. In fact, 5 times the trial was postponed. Each delay reopened the wound for both families. Every time they prepared themselves to finally get answers, the date moved once again. Brooklyn's uncle, Billy Bashford, said, "It's been hell. It's affected everything. Work, family, life." Grandmother Elaine felt trapped in a loop. Every delay meant reliving that day, that she heard her daughter's name, and she broke down in the garden. And then there were the psychiatric reports, 5 of them in total, each one of them trying to decide whether Derek Martin was actually in control that day, or not. Derek claimed that he'd lost it, that his mind wasn't clear, that this wasn't murder, it was manslaughter. His defense was arguing diminished responsibility, that his depression and anxiety made him unable to control his actions. But prosecutors, of course, told a different story. They pointed to every careful step that he took afterwards. The cleaning, the moved car, the discarded phones, the calculated web of lies. Detective Chief Inspector Kimberly said, "There were a number of things he did that showed clear thought. This wasn't chaos. It was controlled." Ex-wife Elaine refused to accept his excuses too. In fact, she told reporters, he always said he knew how to play the system, but not this time. Finally, in October of 2025, the trial went ahead. 2 families filling the gallery at Brighton Law Courts. 4 children waiting for justice. When the verdict came, Derek Martin stood still, emotionless as always. He was found guilty on both counts of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 29 years. The judge, Dame Justice Thornton, told him, "Your attacks were driven by rage and resentment. The families will suffer for the rest of their lives."
Derek Martin, you have been convicted by a jury of the murders of Chloe and Joshua Bashford on the 9th of June 2023. Chloe and Joshua were killed in their home, where they were entitled to feel safe. You were in Chloe and Joshua's home because they had welcomed you into their lives.
Outside court, Brooklyn, now 18, spoke softly to reporters. "We've been waiting for this for 2.5 years, he said. It's a relief. A chapter closed." He said he was happy with the verdict because it was what his parents deserved. "They were amazing people," he said. "Perfect parents, always there for us." Then he paused. "I hate him, obviously, but I just think he's disgusting. I don't really have feelings towards him anymore." When asked how he copes, he said something undramatic but incredibly real. "It's hard to think about them without thinking about what happened, but 99% of the time it's just good memories, the good things we did. You never get rid of the rest, but you learn to live with it." Today, Brooklyn is training to be an electrician, and he and his siblings live with grandmother Elaine, the woman who once trusted the man, who then turned around and took everything from them. A man who pretended to be family, a day that started like any other, and a crime that left 4 children sitting at a table with the very same person who had just taken their world away. True evil often wears a mask. We've just got to hope that we won't be the ones to see it slip. The old Pontiac sat forgotten in the corner of a dusty Pueblo scrapyard. It had been there for years, sun-bleached, rusting, and silent. But in February of 2024, police officers arrived with a warrant, and they carefully opened the trunk. Inside, they found a suitcase. Inside that suitcase, something wrapped, small and heartbreakingly fragile. It was a discovery that would reopen a case that nobody even knew existed, because that discovery belonged to Jesus Jr., who, along with his sister Yesenia, had vanished 6 years earlier. And in all that time, nobody had ever officially reported them missing. How could 2 children just disappear and nobody notice for 6 whole years? To understand that question, we have to start somewhere else entirely. A storage unit on West 6th Street, back in January. And I'll give you one final warning. This one is truly heartbreaking and horrifying. It started with a smell and a mother's instinct that something wasn't right. On the morning of January the 20th, 2024, Karina Minyares' mother was helping her daughter to clear out a storage unit at King Storage on West 6th Street, based in Pueblo, Colorado. Karina and her boyfriend, Jesus Dominguez Sr., had been living out of that unit, but they were now being evicted for non-payment. So Karina's mother came to help, but she quickly became concerned about a large metal container pushed up against the wall. It was sealed shut, it was heavy, and something about it just felt off. She opened it and inside was a trash can, and inside that trash can, encased in hardened concrete, were what appeared to be human remains. Obviously horrified, she contacted the police. Authorities responded just after 8:30 a.m. and the scene was quickly locked down. The Special Victims Unit and the crime scene team were called in, and within 2 days, authorities confirmed what the mother had feared. Inside that trash can, inside the concrete, was the body of a girl. Police began trying to identify the remains and the people who had been renting out the unit, and that search obviously led them to Karina Minyares and Jesus Dominguez Sr., both aged 37. Just to clarify here, Jesus Sr. was the two children's father, and Karina was the children's stepmother. The children's biological mother was a woman named Alberta. And actually, quite interestingly, Jesus Sr. and Karina originally met as pen pals, whilst Jesus was in prison. I hope that all makes sense. I just wanted to help set the scene. At the time, neither of them seemed particularly alarmed. They sat for interviews with detectives. They offered vague timelines and even floated the idea that the two children, 3-year-old Yesenia and 5-year-old Jesus Jr., were still alive and possibly living with relatives in Arizona. But when detectives followed up on that lead, it went nowhere. Nobody in Arizona had seen either of the children, and come to think of it, no one in Colorado had either. In fact, as Pueblo police soon discovered, nobody anywhere had seen either child since the summer of 2018, 6 years earlier. That was when everything changed. A DNA match confirmed that the remains in the concrete did indeed belong to Yesenia Dominguez. Her brother, though, was still missing, and police now had very good reason to believe that he too may not be alive. Investigators started asking the couple about cars, and this is because one family member remembered something strange about Karina's old Pontiac Grand Am. A foul smell, to be specific. A smell that never quite went away. When Yesenia's remains were identified in January of 2024, one question rang louder than the rest. How did nobody notice these children were missing? Between 2018 and 2024, there was no missing persons report filed for either child, no school alerts, no medical checkups missed, no welfare checks requested. Instead, friends and extended family were told a simple rehearsed lie, that Jesus Jr. and Yesenia had gone to live with relatives in Arizona. And since Jesus Dominguez Sr. was the children's biological father, and Karina Minyares was their legal guardian during this time, there was no immediate reason to question it. The couple even continued collecting government benefits for the children, long after the time that the kids could be accounted for. Behind closed doors, though, within the family, there were concerns. Barbara Sanchez says that her relationship with the two children is like a second grandmother to them, and a second mother to their biological mother, Alberta. Barbara and Alberta were tied together in a kind of web made up from Jesus Sr.'s previous relationships. So Barbara Sanchez, this second grandmother, noticed that she wasn't seeing the kids anymore. She also remembered Karina snapping at her, saying, "Why do you care? You're not their grandmother." Whenever Barbara or the children's mother Alberta tried to visit, they were blocked from doing so. At one point, the group even drove to Karina's apartment in order to ask where the kids actually were. However, Karina called the police on them and then claimed once again that the children had simply moved out of state. And after that, they stopped asking. And for 6 long years, that story held out. Karina and Jesus Sr. then drifted in and out of housing, sometimes in motels, sometimes living in their car. They used Brown and Crystal regularly. They pawned their possessions and they moved on frequently. By the end of this period of time, They were living in a storage unit, one that was filled with junk, and a metal bin full of concrete. According to police, they never told anyone that the children were missing, and the only reason that investigators even began looking for them was because Yesenia was accidentally found, and now the fact that there was no sign of her brother was extremely concerning. And sadly, this concern would manifest into a dark reality very soon, because when detectives asked the couple about vehicles, a scrapyard on the outskirts of Pueblo had something that belonged to Karina, her old Pontiac Grand Am, the one she used to live in. And in the trunk of that car, under layers of cat litter, baby powder, and a comforter, lay a suitcase. And inside that suitcase was Jesus Jr. It happened on March the 14th, 2018. Dominguez Sr. later testified that he and Karina were driving her 2004 Pontiac Grand Am to pick up the kids and a nephew from school. He said it was an ordinary day, until that is, 3-year-old Yesenia had an accident in the back seat. She simply wet herself. But for Karina, this run-of-the-mill issue, one that is so easy to fix and then to comfort the child, was instead apparently unforgivable. Rather than clean Yesenia up and change her clothes, Karina instead pulled the car over and made her stepdaughter sit on the floor of the vehicle on top of a plastic bag. This was in order to keep the seats clean. Dominguez Sr. said she stayed there for the rest of the ride. By the time they arrived home, Karina claimed that Yesenia had stopped breathing. Neither adult called 911. Neither of them took her to the hospital or did anything to help. Dominguez Sr. later told the court that Karina panicked, and that is because Yesenia was already showing visible signs of maltreatment, including a bite mark on her hand. So, rather than getting help for Yesenia, they did the unthinkable. Karina told him the girl wasn't responding, so instead of getting help, they carried their daughter inside and placed her in a suitcase. At this time, they were living in a rental home, but eviction was looming. So when the sheriff came knocking a few days later to kick them out, they grabbed what they could and moved into the Pontiac, the same car in which Yesenia had met her end. She was now entombed in a suitcase, stashed away in the trunk. For the next several weeks, the couple lived inside the car. They were eating, sleeping, using substances, all whilst their son, Jesus Jr., was still alive, with his sister's remains rotting away just a few feet from him. Dominguez Sr. said the smell came slowly at first. They tried using baby powder and cat litter to mask it, but by April, it was unmistakable. Still though, he did nothing. Karina, meanwhile, had grown increasingly frustrated with Jesus Jr. He had now begun regressing in his toilet training, something that could well have been happening due to stress and anxiety or fear. He was 5 years old, remember. Every accident though seemed to trigger Karina's rage, a rage that had already claimed one life. So honestly, what chance did he stand? In court, Dominguez Sr. described the atmosphere inside the car as tense, filthy, and dangerous. They were regularly using illicit substances. They parked up in abandoned lots or behind gas stations. And each morning, they'd wake up beside the decomposing body of somebody that they should have loved and protected. But instead, they just carried on like nothing was wrong. Jesus Jr., Dominguez Sr. said, never asked about his sister. Horrifically, she was still so close physically, but she was gone in every other sense. From late March through to May of 2018, as the family continued to live in the car, the suitcase holding Yesenia's body remained sealed in the trunk. It was wrapped in plastic and surrounded by childish attempts to hide the smell. But that smell was growing harder and harder to ignore, especially as the seasons changed. In the back seat, 5-year-old Jesus Jr. was still alive, but what an absolutely horrifying thing to even begin to think about. He must have been so confused, isolated, trapped, and scared. To think of him being so neglected and alone really breaks my heart. Poor boy. Dominguez Sr. testified that Jesus Jr.'s behavior began to shift. He said he became quiet and anxious. He stopped playing altogether. His toilet training regressed further and further, and every small mistake, every accident, became a lightning rod for Karina's fury. Dominguez Sr. claimed that he tried to keep the peace, but peace was impossible in those conditions. He said Karina was using substances heavily by that point, and he was too. And now that money was running out, both adults were suffering the effects of withdrawal, paranoia, and exhaustion from a hectic life. The Pontiac Grand Am became a mobile family mausoleum, one part trap, one part crime scene, just a total nightmare. But despite everything, they kept on driving around. They used the car to run errands, to buy their next fix, and to sleep in shifts. According to Dominguez Sr., Karina would scream at Jesus Jr. for soiling himself. She once even threatened to tie him to the roof of the car. And another time, when he wet his pants once again, she dragged him to a self-service car wash and sprayed him down with a high-pressure hose. Dominguez said he was there when it happened. He said he remembered Jesus Jr. screaming. The water was cold and sharp, and it left red welts on the inner thighs. Still though, no hospital, no checkup, no help. The only thing they ever did was threaten him to stay quiet, and so he did. Dominguez Sr. described Jesus Jr. as withdrawn. He rarely spoke unless spoken to. He just sat there, clinging to old toys and stuffed animals. But then, even those small, final comforts were taken away from him as punishment. And while all of this was happening, his sister Yesenia's body remained just a few feet away, in the trunk in the suitcase, day after day, night after night, until finally, in late April or early May of 2018, Jesus Jr. would be with his sister once more. Dominguez Sr. claims that he stepped out of the car to run an errand, though that later turned out to be a pickup of substances. When he returned, Karina was in the front seat, and Jesus Jr. was now completely still. She turned to him and said, "He's not breathing." Dominguez Sr. claims that he froze. According to his later testimony, the scene in the Pontiac felt hauntingly familiar. Just like with Yesenia, Karina offered no explanation. There was no signs of panic, and there was no signs that she had tried to save his life. All she could say, "He's not breathing." The details of Jesus Jr.'s final moments remain murky. By the time he was found, no autopsy could determine the exact cause of his passing due to the decomp. The remains were far, far too gone. But what we do know is this: neither adult once again called 911. Nobody checked for a pulse. Perhaps he could have been saved. Instead, they just followed the same sick pattern as they had with Yesenia. Dominguez Sr. claimed they drove to a secluded spot near the Pueblo Dam, and there they retrieved another suitcase, one that they had been keeping in the back seat. They laid out multiple trash bags, and then they placed the body inside, wrapping it in layers of plastic and old blankets. Dominguez Sr. told the court he could barely look. Once the suitcase was sealed, they then stuffed it into the trunk, right next to Yesenia. Brother and sister, side by side, hidden inside this car from hell. After that, their spiral really accelerated. Dominguez said that he began using more heavily, just whatever substances they could now find. Dominguez Sr. said the Pontiac had now become unbearable, as if it wasn't before. Even through the air fresheners, cat litter and baby powder, the smell was now completely overwhelming. Eventually, the couple moved Yesenia's body from the car and into a metal trash can and filled it with concrete. They sealed it up and left it in the storage unit that they were living in. However, they kept the second suitcase containing Jesus Jr. inside the trunk. But when that car eventually stopped running later that year, they simply abandoned it. And with it, they abandoned Jesus Jr. once again. That vehicle was eventually sold for scrap. It was taken to a local junkyard, and there it was parked up and untouched for nearly 6 years. Nobody ever opened the trunk. No one asked any questions. And so, Karina and Dominguez Sr. continued their lives. They just kept on telling anybody that inquired that the kids now lived in Arizona, and so they had no funeral, no headstones, nobody grieving for them. They were reduced to a suitcase in a junkyard and a concrete-filled trash can, forming a makeshift tomb. But still, somehow, for almost 6 years, that lie held out. Until that is, as we know, Karina's own mother opened the lid of that metal bin in January of 2024, and the silence was now finally broken. When the truth finally surfaced in early 2024, the legal fallout would come fast. Karina and Dominguez Sr. were arrested in February, and each of them faced 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of abuse of a body. Dominguez Sr. faced a charge for government benefit fraud because, as we know, even after the children were gone, the couple continued to collect support that was meant for them. At first, both of them stayed silent, but then the prosecutors offered Dominguez Sr. a deal. If he testified against Karina, they would reduce his charge from first-degree murder to second-degree. He accepted, and in July, he stood in court and described what happened. The jury listened as he recounted the car, the smell, and the quiet suffering from inside the Pontiac. He spoke about Yesenia being made to sit on the plastic bag. He talked about the pressure washing incident. He repeated Karina's chilling words, "He's not breathing," all whilst Karina sat just feet away. When it was finally Karina's turn to speak, she didn't deny knowing what had happened. Instead, her defense told a different story. She said that she wasn't the killer, Dominguez Sr. was. Her lawyers argued that she acted out of fear, out of manipulation, and, strangely, out of love. They said that Dominguez was violent and controlling. They claimed that Karina only helped to hide the bodies because of the fact that she was terrified of him. Prosecutors, however, pointed to receipts. Literal receipts. Concrete that was purchased with Karina's credit card. The storage unit that was hired in Karina's name. Her vehicle, her suitcase. And they pointed to other behaviour too. Blocking family members who tried to see the kids. Calling police on relatives that were asking questions. Telling everyone that the children were in Arizona. They reminded jurors that not once in 6 years was there evidence that Karina had even tried to call for help. Not when Yesenia or Jesus Jr. needed her the most. Not even when the smell made her own mother joke, "Did someone die in there?" The courtroom was quiet when that quote was read aloud. It was the realization that a life had been reduced to a smell, that someone was now trying to just laugh away. After days of testimony, closing statements cut straight to the point. Jesus Jr. and Yesenia had quietly disappeared, and the very people that should have been responsible for their care had instead turned their car and their storage unit into horrifyingly disrespectful graves. When the jury returned, there was no hesitation. Karina Miñarez was guilty. 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of abuse of a body. The judge delivered her sentence that same day, and it was final. No chance of parole. Karina would have no future beyond those prison walls. After the verdict, the courtroom shifted its attention to the only person still left to face their punishment. In September, Jesus Dominguez Sr., the one who took the plea deal, was sentenced to 32 years in prison. And now Karina Miñarez has already begun serving life without parole. 2 lives were lost, countless lives were destroyed, 2 adults are behind bars, neither of which may ever get out. There are no dramatic statements I could make, or emotional apologies that I could share that could ever change anything here. In this case, what's done is done, and sadly, it's just god-awful. The neighbours assumed that he'd already left. A few days earlier, Alessandro Venier had been telling people that he was heading to Colombia, that he was moving there for good, to start over with his girlfriend and their baby daughter. Kind of strangely though, nobody saw him packing up his stuff, but there were whispers that his visa was already sorted and his documents were prepped and ready to go. He'd even said goodbye to 1 or 2 friends. So when things fell quiet at the house on Via dei Lotti, most people just shrugged it off or thought nothing at all. But behind that silence, something was badly wrong. Inside that home, the 6-month-old baby could sometimes be heard crying, and Alessandro was now completely unreachable. His mother, Lorena Venier, was still pushing the baby's stroller through town and smiling at neighbours as though nothing had changed. But as you can already tell, some things weren't adding up. When police finally stepped inside that house, the truth was Well, I'm gonna let you know throughout this video. And it's not what you're thinking. It's somehow much, much worse. Alessandro Venier had always talked about leaving Italy. In fact, many people around him believed that he was about to do just that. The 35-year-old lived in Gemona del Friuli, a quiet mountain town in the far northeast of Italy. He was unemployed, picking up the occasional odd job, and staying in the same house as his girlfriend Mei Lin, as well as their baby daughter and his mother Lorena Venier. He'd been speaking openly about returning to Colombia, the place where he and Mei Lin had once opened a small restaurant together. He said that he missed the pace of life there, that he wanted to start afresh, and more importantly, he wanted/needed to go soon, before certain legal issues in Italy could block him from leaving the country. To his friends, he was clear, this move was to be permanent. He even implied that Mei Lin and the baby would be going with him. Keeping a young family together did seem to make sense, but according to the people closest to him, that was never actually going to happen, because there was one obstacle in the way, a pretty big one. Lorena, his 61-year-old mother, didn't want to lose access to her granddaughter, nor did she want Mei Lin, whom she'd come to see as the daughter I never had, to disappear overseas. Still though, it seems that nobody actually voiced these concerns aloud. I guess sometimes if you don't talk about something, it feels like it'll just go away. To the outside world though, the family looked like they were simply preparing for a big transition. People stopped seeing Alessandro, Mei Lin stopped talking to their neighbours. But Lorena continued to act as if everything was normal, doing her grocery shopping, taking strolls, pushing the baby in the pram. But behind closed doors, things had already gotten very, very dark. On July the 31st, a call came into emergency services from Via Dialotti. The woman on the line was distressed, her voice was shaking. She said there was a body in a house. Within the hour, officers arrived at the Venier residence, with mother Lorena meeting them at the door, whilst holding her granddaughter in her arms. Mei Lin stood nearby, pale and silent. The officers entered cautiously. What they found in the garage of that home didn't look much at first. A large bin sealed tight. Inside though, a nauseating smell hit them instantly. Chemical, foul, and often tied to inhuman acts. The bin had been packed with quicklime, which is kind of weird, but beneath that, they found the remains of Alessandro Venier. He had been dismantled into 3 sections. Each part was carefully wrapped and sealed. There was no splatter or spatter at the scene, no mess, no other sign that anything had happened. Police believed though whoever had done this had experience, or at the very least, good medical knowledge. You see, the cuts were clean, precise and contained. That night, forensic teams worked tirelessly. Meanwhile, word was getting out and it was spreading fast. Soon the town of Gemona was buzzing with quiet panic. A man was now gone. He had been hidden in 3 separate parts, and it had happened right there under their noses. Literally, by the sounds of it, or smell of it. Police didn't announce any arrests immediately. Instead, they quietly escorted both women in the house to the station. Of course, this didn't mean they were guilty, but questions did need answering. Nobody yet knew who was responsible. All that they now knew was that Alessandro hadn't emigrated after all. He wasn't just a missing person. He wasn't starting his new life. Instead, the very opposite. He'd been there, at home with his family, the entire time. That phone call that the police received actually came from within that family home. The woman who placed the call was none other than Mei Lin Castro Monsalvo, Alessandro's partner and mother of his daughter. Her hands were shaking as she dialed. During the phone call that Mei Lin made to emergency services, a voice could also be heard in the background saying, "No, Lorena, no." Then another, "My mother-in-law killed her son." The plan, as Lorena later admitted, was simple and really just ice cold. Keep Alessandro's disappearance quiet for a while, wait until the worst of the smell had passed, and then transport his remains into the mountains and scatter them. It was meant to look like he'd simply left for Colombia. They had documents, they had a story, and they believed that nobody would question it. But what they didn't plan for was the psychological weight of what they had already done. The date was July the 25th. That evening, according to mother Lorena, she made her son a glass of lemonade. She told police that she dissolved an entire blister pack of sleeping pills into that drink. Alessandro drank it without question. Why would he? It was his mother. The plan, Lorena said later, was to put him to sleep peacefully. No pain, no fear, no struggle. But the pills didn't do quite enough. When her son didn't fully lose consciousness, Lorena fetched 2 syringes of insulin that she'd taken years ago from her hospital job. She injected both doses into Alessandro's abdomen. This insulin she had originally taken years earlier, saying that her original plan was to use him for the same purpose but on herself, but she then decided against it, before then realizing that it might solve a different kind of despair. Still though, Alessandro didn't go quietly. He began to stir once again. He was confused, disorientated and weak. He tried to get up. He tried to fight back. And that is when Mei Lin, the mother of his child, pressed a pillow over his face. Lorena says that he still didn't stop, and that's when Mei Lin took her shoelaces, and she then wrapped them around his neck and pulled. We stunned him with a sleeping pill at around 5:30 p.m, Lorena later said. He didn't die until almost 11, and then hours later, the house was almost silent. At first, Lorena claimed that the goal was to help Mei Lin escape DV, that Alessandro had become violent, and that they were both afraid of him. But when he finally stopped breathing, they were left with a body and no good plan. We didn't think about what to do with the body, she said, but it wouldn't fit in the bin. So Lorena, well, she knew what she had to do. She brought out her hacksaw. She laid down a sheet to catch the vital fluids. She then got to work methodically, leaving 3 pieces, no mess, no splatter. It was clinical, and the police suspicion that the cuts came from someone with medical training was indeed correct. Lorena Venier was a nurse, decades in healthcare, respected and trusted. Nobody would have imagined her capable of this. I thought we could handle everything ourselves, she said. We'd just wait until it was time to scatter him. While Lorena did the cutting, Mei Lin had bought lime from Amazon, ordered days earlier. They then moved the remains into the garage, and for almost a week, life, for them at least, just carried on. And so by the next morning there was no sign of Alessandro. No phone calls nor text messages. His friends no longer heard from him. He had been all but erased. Lorena simply told neighbours that he'd left the country already, and Mei Lin didn't say much at all. It was as if Alessandro had simply vanished, just a man who'd skipped town. After all, he had already told people that he was moving to Colombia, and the date was fast approaching, so maybe he'd done exactly that. To friends, to family, to neighbours pushing their strollers beside them, no one seemed to suspect a thing, until Mei Lin snapped and made the call. Lorena Venier's formal confession took place inside the Trieste prison. It was a 3-hour interview with prosecutors. She didn't hesitate to talk. In fact, she described each step in detail. Methodical, deliberate, as if laying out a difficult medical procedure. The story she told was not only horrifying, but built on a disturbing foundation. She claimed that this had been coming for a long time. Mei Lin had been asking me to kill Alessandro for months, she said, ever since the baby was born in January. According to Lorena, her son had become volatile. He insulted Mei Lin. He ignored her postnatal depression. He refused to work. He drank heavily. And sometimes he used substances too. But worst of all, she claimed, he hurt them. He threatened to drown her in Colombia. He punched me when I said I'd report him. He said no one would look for her if she disappeared, Lorena said. However, a real issue here is that there were no official complaints on file. There was nothing like police reports or restraining orders. But Lorena insisted that this was because fear had kept them silent. She said that the final trigger was Alessandro's plan to move to Colombia with Mei Lin and the baby in tow. I couldn't let him take them. Mei Lin's life was in danger. My granddaughter's life was in danger. I had no choice. She told prosecutors that she viewed Mei Lin as family. As we know, she called her the daughter she never had. She simply couldn't bear the thought of losing her. She even explained how they'd planned to protect the baby from the truth. We would have told her only good things about her father, she said. We wanted to spare her from knowing what really happened. Well, that plan sounds almost noble, doesn't it? However, prosecutors dug deeper, and the picture that emerged was far darker than anyone expected. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment decision. The lime had already been purchased from Amazon. They'd been collecting the tools that they would need, and according to Lorena, they chose July the 25th on purpose, just before Alessandro's supposed departure to Colombia. He told friends he was leaving. No one would come looking for him. This was to be the perfect cover. Their story to the outside world was simple, that he'd gone abroad, that he would no longer be in touch, because he needed time. Meanwhile, the bin in the garage began to smell. However, Lorena kept on working as usual, and Mei Lin stayed inside caring for the baby as she always did. But the smell kept on growing stronger, and so did the guilt, and then the break. Mei Lin called 112, even though Lorena tried to stop her. The bruises on both women later confirmed that it wasn't just a verbal exchange. Mei Lin had an emotional collapse. She told officers what had happened, though none of her statements are admissible in court without a lawyer present. Lorena did all the talking. She took full responsibility. She insisted that Mei Lin hadn't actually killed Alessandro. However, she did say that she helped. Still, prosecutors found evidence of planning from both of them, and inside the home, officers recovered the tools, the saw, the syringes, the sheets, and realized that the whole scene had been deeply cleaned, but not quite well enough. In the days after the confession, the town of Gemona del Friuli was silent. This shock wasn't simply because of a murder, although that is shocking at the best of times. It was over who had done it. People had known Lorena Venier as a kind and attentive nurse, the kind of person who helped out with flu shots for the elderly and would hold your hand during delivering bad news. And now she was behind bars for dismembering her own son. The baby that was just 6 months old, when her mother and grandmother did what they did, was taken into care. For a time, Mei Lin requested that the child be sent to her family in Colombia, but that decision is still pending. Meanwhile, Mei Lin herself remains in a special reduced custody facility for mothers. Her lawyers argue that she was coerced, emotionally unstable, and a victim of both DV and psychological manipulation, but the prosecution sees it differently. Lorena Venier has been formally charged with aggravated murder and destruction of a corpse. Mei Lin Castro Monsalvo is under investigation for instigation to murder. The trial is expected to unfold in the coming months, but one thing has already been decided. Alessandro didn't disappear. He was erased by the people that should have loved him most, by the two people he should have been safest with. Let's keep an eye on this one. This story all started with a fisherman, a man who'd cast his line into the still green water of a lagoon in Hortalandia, a quiet city on the edge of Sao Paulo. The water was calm that morning. He noticed something tangled up in the reeds. At first it looked like trash, a blue tarp, some sheets, but as he got closer, the smell hit him. He stopped moving. He knew something was dreadfully wrong. He called the police immediately, and within the hour, that lagoon, once peaceful, once silent, was now swarming with flashing lights and officers combing through the water. When they lifted the tarp out, everyone froze. Inside it was the body of a girl. Her remains had been wrapped in sheets and tied down with stones. It appeared that someone had wanted her to stay hidden forever. And then a shocking discovery. On her back, carved in large letters, were the initials PCC. Those feared letters mean only one thing in Brazil: the Primeiro Comando de Capital, one of the country's most dangerous criminal factions. So, police thought they'd stumbled into something massive, a cartel-style message, a stark warning. The girl had been missing since July the 12th. Her family had been posting her photo online, begging anyone for help. Her mother, Priscilla, wrote, please, if anyone sees her, tell her to come home. She's my whole life. But by July the 18th, it was too late. When police told the family what they'd found near the lagoon, Priscilla collapsed. Her stepfather couldn't even speak. They just couldn't understand. How could something so horrific happen to a girl like Nicolee? And why the letters PCC? Something about this scene just felt off. The sheets that she had been wrapped in didn't seem random. In fact, it came from a nearby house. And the tarp, that was recognised instantly by a man who lived less than a mile away. In fact, he said it belonged to his son. The truth was now starting to form piece by piece. This one is absolutely unreal, and the twists keep on coming. Before any of this, Nicolee was just a normal teenager, a bright, funny, artistic 15-year-old from Sao Paulo. She loved taking photos, scrolling on social media, and laughing with her friends. Her teachers said that she was the kind of student who made their days lighter just by walking into the classroom. She wasn't rebellious, she wasn't lost, she didn't live a dramatic life. She was loved and she was happy. When the school year ended, she begged her parents to spend her winter break in Hortolandia, a smaller town where her grandfather lived. She said it would be nice to slow down, to visit old friends, and one friend in particular, a boy that she used to know. That boy was 17, and his name was Enrique. They'd known each other since childhood, although arguably they were still there, and they'd studied together before her family moved away. And like a lot of adolescent so-called love stories, it all started out innocent. Daily text messages, video calls, little heart emojis sent before bed. But lately, the tone had changed. According to her stepfather, Nicolee had started hiding her phone more often. She even told her mother that the boy was different now, more jealous, more demanding. Sometimes he'd ask where she was, who she was with, and what she was wearing. Her mother just tried to brush this off as teenage drama. But a week later, Nicolee said something that her family would never forget. "He's not like he used to be. Sometimes he scares me." At the time, they thought she meant emotionally, but they had no idea how literal those words could become. On June the 29th, Nicolee left for Hortolandia. Her mother watched her pack her bag, a few outfits, her sketchbook, a phone charger. She hugged her and told her to be safe, and then promised to call her every day. For the first week, everything seemed fine. She sent selfies from her grandfather's garden, videos of the dog, messages filled with hearts. But then on July the 10th, her text messages slowed down. Her friends noticed that she wasn't online as much, and when one of them DM'd her, the reply felt off. They said it was short and cold, almost like it wasn't her writing it at all. And then by July the 12th, everything went silent. Her mother tried calling but received no answer. Text messages, nothing. She reached out to the boyfriend, Enrique. He picked up and his voice was calm. He simply said, "We broke up. She left the house on her own. I haven't seen her since." There wasn't too much to question here. Another failed teenage relationship. But the family later realized that one line of what he said stuck out. Something that he said before the family even realized she was truly missing. That night, Nicolee's grandfather filed a missing persons report. The police began searching the neighborhood, checking bus terminals, questioning anyone who might have seen her. At first, it looked like a runaway case. But then, investigators spoke to a neighbor, and that changed everything. The neighbor said that she had seen Nicolee, actually at Enrique's house that weekend, and she remembered it because she heard yelling. Also kind of strange was that she didn't just hear one girl and one guy arguing. Instead, she was sure that she heard two girls' voices and one boy's. She thought it was just an argument, but when she peeked out of her window, she did see something that she couldn't explain. A wheelbarrow being pushed down the street at night. The pieces were now all aligning. The lagoon, the tarp, the sheet, and soon a chilling detail from Nicolee's own mother would make everything even worse. A few weeks before the crime, a girl had messaged Nicolee's mother's husband, her stepfather, online. She was pretending to be Nicolee's classmate. She asked for her social media accounts, asked where she lived and who she was dating. At the time, it seemed pretty harmless, but later, investigators would discover who that girl really was. By now, things were already way out of control, and police started to hone in on two suspects. When police realized that Nicole's ex-boyfriend Enrique was no longer at home, they knew that time was running out, and they knew that the further away he got, the colder the trail would become. They issued an alert across Sao Paulo state. Posters, patrols, checkpoints, all of them brought in nothing. It was like the ground had just swallowed him up. But then, 2 days later, his father got a message. "Dad, I swear I didn't do anything. Some guys from Sao Paulo are after me. I can't go home." However, unluckily for him, investigators had already checked his phone records, and strangely they couldn't find any kind of threats made towards him. There were no messages, no guys from Sao Paulo. So unless proof arose, the only real explanation was that he was lying, and wherever he wasn't alone. Detectives began retracing his steps. That's when they realized he had one person left who might help him. His grandmother, who lived nearly 500 kilometers away, in the small town of Cornelio Procopio in Parana. So police reached out to local units there, and they told them to keep watch. Within 48 hours, they had a hit. A neighbor had spotted two teenagers, a boy and a girl, sneaking into an older woman's house late at night. They said they were carrying backpacks, and hauntingly, they never saw them coming out. On the morning of July the 20th, police surrounded the home, but what followed wasn't like a scene from an action movie. Instead, the door opened quietly, and there they were, Nicole's ex-boyfriend, Enrique, and a 14-year-old girl, Evelyn. Both of them seemed super calm, for a couple that had the Brazilian mafia after them. The girl crossed her arms, staring at the floor. The boy just said, "We knew you'd find us." Inside the house, police found their phones. They found their clothes, and a note scribbled on torn notebook paper. It read, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." The couple was brought back to Sao Paulo, and then placed in juvenile custody. When questioned separately, their stories started falling apart immediately, like a Dollar Tree napkin lost in a jacuzzi. At first, the boy said that Nicole came to the house to talk, that she had then gotten angry, picked up a sharp kitchen implement, and then she attacked him. He said that he simply reacted, that everything that happened was all self-defense. But then investigators asked a simple question. If it was self-defense, why wrap the body? Why tie it with stones? Why flee to another state? And Enrique didn't seem to have any answers for those questions. Then they spoke to Evelyn. Her version was different, and not just a little bit different, but completely different. She said that she was there when it happened, but that she didn't touch Nicole. She said Enrique lost control, that he snapped. When police told her that the body was dismembered, they said her face went pale. Evelyn said, "I didn't know about that part." But there was one issue with that statement. She did know, she must have known, because at that very moment, forensic teams were matching her fingerprints to the tape that had been used to seal up the tarp. Detectives noticed something else strange, something that seemed like they were trying to formulate a story. Both Enrique and Evelyn used exactly the same words to describe Nicole. The word jealous came up again and again. She couldn't accept the breakup. She attacked us out of jealousy. But jealousy couldn't explain what came next, because as investigators dug deeper, they discovered something horrifying. This crime was not a spontaneous crime of passion. It wasn't self-defense. It had all been horrifically planned. It was Evelyn that had been messaging Nicole's stepfather, as well as Nicole herself, in the days leading up to the murder. She was simply pretending to be someone else. She asked to meet up. She said that she wanted to talk, and so she lured Nicole to Enrique's house, and now the trap was set, ready to snap shut. Even after the actual act was carried out, it doesn't seem that any of them felt any remorse. Of course, there was no way to undo what was already done, but they didn't confess or try and get help. Instead, they cleaned up. Then they packed their bags and fled. But even after their confessions, something about them unsettled investigators. Strangely, they weren't super emotional and remorseful. They said that they just stared. But when investigators checked their phones, they found something else chilling. According to the lead detective, they didn't show remorse. They just said it wasn't what they wanted, and that they panicked. To him, though, it was obvious. This was all deliberate and planned, and he called it what it was, an act of cruelty. Back at the crime scene, forensic teams reconstructed what had happened, and the picture that they painted would haunt every officer who was working on the case. Inside Enrique's house, investigators pieced together the final moments of Nicole's life. Every room told a fragment of the story: the red on the floor, the drag marks, the missing bedsheets, and what those clues combined revealed was terrifying. According to investigators, the three of them were inside for less than an hour before that neighbour heard the shouting. Then a door slammed, something heavy dropped, followed by a deafening silence. Police believe that the argument began in the bedroom, and at some point it turned violent. But here's where things kind of stop making sense. As we know, Enrique had been telling the police that Nicole had attacked him with a sharp implement, that he was only defending himself. But the forensic team found no evidence of a struggle, not one defensive wound on either of the suspects. Meanwhile, the marks on Nicole's body told a completely different story. She hadn't just been attacked in a defensive manner, she had been overpowered. And then the violence escalated beyond anything that could be called defense. Police discovered two sharp weapons in the house, both with traces of Nicole's DNA. One was cleanly washed and put back in its drawer. The other had been left in the sink, the handle sticky with red, and the blade bent and dulled. Next to it, on the counter, was a hammer. Its head was still stained with a dark red film. They found streaks leading from the bedroom to the backyard, a path to where the wheelbarrow had been stored. That's when police realised they'd simply wheeled the remains out the back gate, down a dirt path, and then into the lagoon just blocks away. One small but clever detail confirmed it. When divers recovered the tarp, they found pieces of gravel embedded in the fabric. That very same gravel matched that found in the yard behind Enrique's house. He hadn't even left the neighbourhood. And then there were the letters PCC. They were just a red herring. There was absolutely no connection, no gang ties, no messages sent. The letters had been carved post-mortem. Whether this was planned or a moment of genius is unknown. Those letters weren't actually meant to represent the fear and power of a gang, but instead to simply confuse the police and to try and get away with murder. It was all theatre, a distraction. This guy's name is insanely long, so here we go. Detective Jose Regino Melo Legas Filo later said, "It was a deliberate attempt to disguise the real motive. They wanted to make it look like organised crime, but it was a personal act, an act of cruelty. Every discovery pushed one truth closer to the surface. This was always about jealousy, hatred, and control." The detail that broke the lead detective came from a single statement by Enrique. When asked why they didn't call for help, he said, "We didn't think anyone would believe us." But he knew that they knew what they'd done, and they knew it was unforgivable. Forensic teams wrapped up their search after 2 days, and every piece of evidence told the same story. But even after the facts were clear, one question lingered on. What turned two teenagers into this? What makes them believe they can destroy a life and still just walk away? To Nicole's mother, that question never had an answer. On social media, she wrote, "The worst pain a mother can go through. Eternal mourning. You will be loved and remembered forever, my princess. Justice must be done." Those words spread across Brazil, shared thousands of times. And now the people demanded justice. And soon, Nicole's name became more than a simple tragedy. It would become a movement. When the news broke, Brazil stopped. Images of Nicole's smile filled every TV screen, every timeline, every phone. A girl once known only in her small circle, was now the face of something much larger, a nation's breaking point. This wasn't simply about what happened to her, it was about who had done it. 2 juveniles, one of them not even old enough to drive. It was cruel, calculated and cold. The police chief gave a press statement that week. He said, "This was a crime of extreme violence and precision. This was premeditated." The story spread like wildfire. Headlines called it the case that shattered Hortalandia. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding white balloons and photos of Nicolie. They shouted one word: justice. Both Enrique and Evelyn were officially charged under Brazil's juvenile statute, the highest level of punishment allowed for minors. They were taken to a youth detention centre in Campinas. However, for many this was not enough, and that is because under Brazilian law, no matter how severe the crime, minors can only be held for a maximum of 3 years. Yes, you heard that right. In this case, that means 3 years for a life. That realization is what ignited a national movement. It began online, a petition for Nicolie's law. The messaging was clear. Brazil needed tougher justice for violent youth offenders, and better systems to stop this kind of cruelty before it even started. Within just days, it had tens of thousands of signatures, and the description read, "Nicolie's death is a cry for help, echoing across our country. No family should endure such pain, while offenders walk free after a few years." And so, bubbling away under the surface was a mixture of outrage and heartbreak. Punishment alone wasn't really enough. The country now wanted to know, how did 2 people of that age learn to act and lie like such horrific criminals? To manipulate, plan and hide something so horrific, and to do it all without emotion. Psychologists weighed in. Experts called it a case of youth psychopathy, a rare mix of emotional detachment, of jealousy, and fantasy thinking amplified by online culture. Others said it was proof of a deeper social rot, the kind that grows when violence becomes entertainment, which leads to empathy fading. As days passed, Hortalandia returned to its normal rhythm. Buses, markets, children walking to school. But near that lagoon, people still leave flowers, white roses, letters. Someone painted a small mural there, Nicolie's face surrounded by wings with the words, "Justice for our angel." Her mother visits often. She sits by the water, holding a framed photo of her beloved daughter. She once told a reporter, "I don't come here to cry. I come here to remind her she's still loved." As of now, the investigation is technically complete. All testimonies are taken, forensic reports have been filed, and the suspects remain detained. But to those who knew Nicolie, closure doesn't exist. It really can't. Justice feels too small of a word, because no sentence can measure the life that she would have lived, the college that she might have attended, the songs that she would have danced to, the people that she could have loved. And well, in this case, justice only looks like 3 years anyway. In the months after the crime, something remarkable happened. Nicolie's story began sparking school programs, online safety campaigns, and local discussions about teen jealousy and violence. So, in a way, Nicolie does live on, as a movement grows around her memory. And so the story ends where it began, at a quiet lagoon in Hortalandia. The water looks calm once again. You never know what had happened there. But, beneath the surface, in the mud and the weeds, is a dark memory that no one in that city will ever forget. A reminder that sometimes evil doesn't come from the shadows, nor from gangs or ugly monsters. Sometimes it comes from wearing a familiar friendly face, smiling yet unrecognizable until it's far too late. It's a quiet winter night in Melbourne, Australia. A young man stands outside a modest home, checking his phone for directions. He's nervous but smiling. His date is waiting for him inside. He doesn't know this yet, but she's about to tell him something that should have made him leave right then and there. But you know what they say about curiosity. Inside, the house feels still, like the very walls around them are holding their breath. A single lamp glows warmly against the pale walls, and on the couch sits Jamie Lee Dolaghy, 18 years old, with wide, childlike eyes and a small but uncertain smile. The man sits beside her. They talk and laugh awkwardly. He's being kind and gentle, and as of yet, he has no reason to think that anything is wrong. Until that is, she looks straight at him and says something that freezes him in place. "I think I'm a psychopath." She says this like a statement of fact. She doesn't appear to be joking. It's like she's testing him to see if he'll actually believe her. He lets out a nervous laugh, but she doesn't laugh back. That moment lingers, heavy and confusing. Then she smiles again and says softly, "It's okay." He doesn't truly know what all of this means, not yet at least. But what happened next would shock the entire country. The young woman later said, "I knew it was going to happen." But how did things actually reach this point? How did an ordinary night between two strangers become one of the most haunting true crime cases in Australia's history? To understand that, we need to truly understand who they both were before everything went wrong. Before this tragedy took over the headlines of Australia, there was Morlin Rathod. He was 24 years old, an international student from India now living in Melbourne. He was quiet, focused, always smiling. Friends described him as a jolly person. They said that he loved cricket and loved his studies. And more than anything, he loved to make his parents proud. Morlin had moved to Australia a few years earlier in order to study accountancy. For his parents, Hiran and Jagruti, it really was a dream come true. Their only child, now building a future in a country that he had admired since he was a little boy. Back home in India, his mother remembered how he would sit at a computer for hours, just looking at photos of Melbourne's skyline. He'd tell her, "One day, I'll be there." And when he finally arrived, he still made sure to call home every few days, just to tell them that he was doing okay, to assure them that he was studying hard, and that life was good. By mid-2018, Morlin was balancing classes and work. He'd built a small circle of friends, and he was the kind of person who helped others before himself, always polite and always calm with others. But like many other young adults living far from home, he could also get a little lonely too. His friends said that he started to talk about dating, that he wanted to meet someone kind and someone genuine. So one night he downloaded a dating app called Plenty of Fish. He didn't think much of it, just a way to meet new people, to try some new things. And that's when he saw her, a young woman with a bright smile and a simple profile. Her name was Jamie. They exchanged a few messages. She told him that she was new to dating too, and that she really just wanted company. He told her, "We'll do whatever you want." It was the kind of reassuring thing that someone gentle may say, in order to make the other person feel safe. And so they agreed to meet at her place in Sunbury, a quiet suburb northwest of Melbourne. Morlin didn't hesitate. He texted his friends and said that he was going to meet someone. He was even smiling when he left his apartment. He had absolutely no reason to suspect that something was wrong. No reason to think that the woman waiting for him was actually deep in her own psychological turmoil. And as Morlin was driving through the dark streets towards Sunbury, Jamie Lee Dolaghy was sitting alone in her room, just staring at her computer screen. When detectives later looked at the digital forensics in this case, they couldn't believe the insanity that the hard drive held. Jamie Lee Dolaghy wasn't a monster. Well, debatable. At least she didn't start that way. When she was a little girl, teachers remembered a shy, quiet child who just wanted to be liked. Someone who drew pictures of animals, and said that she wanted to work with them one day. Her home life, though, it wasn't safe, and it hadn't been for a long time. Jamie's childhood was filled with neglect and maltreatment, things that were so severe that it left permanent scars in her mind. And so by the age of 10, the state stepped in. She was removed from her parents and placed into care. Doctors would later say that by then, she had already shown signs of something deep and something fractured. They called it a profound personality disorder. Jamie was extremely impulsive. She could be angry one minute, tearful the next, and then even back to happy. Sometimes she would hurt herself and then beg for forgiveness. One doctor described her mind as a torrent of terrifying thoughts and emotions. From age 14, she lived in a supported home with 2 full-time carers. That meant round-the-clock supervision, because for her, being alone just wasn't safe. Her mental health team documented over 100 hospitalizations for things that she had done to herself. And yet, despite all of this, they said that she still could be kind, that she was gentle and often childlike. People around her often described 2 versions of Jamie. There was the sweet one, and then there was the one that she herself called the demon. In one social media post, she wrote, "Sometimes when no one is looking, my demon comes out to play. I try to fight her, but she gets stronger." Another message said, "She says life hurts, that there's no point fighting it. She won't ever let anyone stop her. If they do, she'll hurt them." Her carers saw these as teenage cries for help, but they were used to her volatility and the constant swings between sadness and rage. But then, in early 2018, everything changed. Jamie turned 18, and with that, the system that had been caring for her up to that point now had to step back. The 24-hour supervision ended, and her case was transitioned to independent living. Her carers tried to protest. They said that she wasn't ready for this, that she could not be left alone. But the funding ran out, and the support ended. And now Jamie was suddenly living by herself in this small house in Sunbury. She was now properly alone for the first time in her life, and without the structure of her group home, her condition only worsened. Her mental state spiraled downwards into chaos. She stopped taking her medications, she stopped going to appointments, and she began telling people that she had bad temptations. In the weeks leading up to July of 2018, Jamie did reach out to her caseworkers. In one text message to them, she said, "I feel really sick with bad thoughts. I want to call the police, but they won't believe me." The reply that she received was short, just 3 words: "Trust your judgment." At the time, no one realized how dangerous that moment was. Jamie really began to believe that she had 2 personalities. The nice me, as she called it, and the other one. In her own words, one's mean, one's nice. They are both me. The other one I'm terrified of. That other side was violent, it was unpredictable, and it was dangerously impulsive. And when she was alone, without medication, the other side began to take control. She started spending more and more time online, visiting forums about dark fantasies, about violent impulses, and games of power. Her search history became a diary of thoughts that she couldn't say out loud. How to choke someone safely, how long until someone passes out, how to get away with it. Each of these searches was another warning. Each one was a quiet alarm bell ringing away in the background, but now nobody was there to hear it. And then on July the 23rd, 2018, Jamie received a message from a stranger on a dating app. His name was Morlin. He was kind, curious, and trusting, and he had no idea that the girl he was about to meet was teetering between 2 worlds, and the countdown to oblivion was now completely out of his hands. It's early evening in Sunbury, just northwest of Melbourne. A cold wind moves through the quiet streets. Inside a small home, Jamie Lee Dolaghy sits alone, knees pulled to her chest, eyes fixed on her phone. On the screen is a dating profile. The young man's face, Morlin. They've only exchanged a few messages, but for Jamie, it's enough. Earlier that day, we know her mind was already spiraling. Her Google searches were getting more and more depraved. "I'm going to kill someone tonight for fun," followed by 10 steps to commit a murder and get away with it. And remember, by this point, she'd already sent a text message to one of her carers. It was a really loud cry for help, but that carer told her to trust your judgment, and so she did just that. She trusted her own broken mind. Her phone lit up. Morlin had sent another message. He told her that he was now on his way. He said he was a little nervous, but he was excited. She had told him that she liked choke play, that it was just a fantasy, and she said that she wanted to try something new. To Morlin, it probably sounded strange, possibly exciting, but ultimately harmless. They even talked about safety, a signal that he could use if it all got too much. He would just tap and she would stop. At least that was the plan that was spoken aloud. At around 9 p.m, Morlin parked outside her home. He sent one more message to say that he'd arrived, and then she walked out to meet him. She smiled and he followed her inside. The house was quiet, warm, and the air was still. They talked for a while, awkwardly at first, and then Jamie looked at him and said softly, almost casually, "I think I'm a psychopath." He smiled nervously, unsure if she was joking. He said, "That's okay." To us, this is such an obvious warning, but in the heat of the moment it seems that it was completely lost, and what happened next unfolded like something from a horror film. According to her later statement, Jamie then moved behind him. She told him to relax, that it was all part of the game, and Morlin put his trust in her. He leaned forward slightly. He even reminded her, "If I tap, you let go." She nodded, and then slowly, she placed her arms around him. Seconds passed, and then she tightened. At first, it might have felt playful, but Morlin decided that this wasn't for him. He tapped once, and then again, but Jamie didn't let go. "I just went tighter and tighter," she told investigators later. Then I whispered in his ear, "It's okay." When her arms grew tired and began to ache, she reached for something nearby, the cord from a personal massage device, quite possibly made by Hitachi, something that she kept on her bedside table. "I told him I was sorry," she said quietly, and just choked him with the cord. Within just minutes, Morlin's time on this earth was now over. Jamie sat in silence beside him. She didn't panic or try to hide. She didn't try to run. Instead, she picked up her phone and dialed the police. When officers answered the phone, they actually already knew who they were dealing with. Jamie, with all her problems throughout her life, as well as her spiraling behaviour, was no stranger to the police. She said, "I strangled someone. He didn't seem scared. He's on my bed. It feels good. I don't want to be a killer." The line went quiet for a few seconds. Then she added something that really sealed her fate even harder. "I knew I was going to kill him if he came over." When police arrived, they found Jamie sitting on the floor, waiting. If anything, they said she looked a little relieved. And later that night, in her recorded interview, she told detectives, "One's mean, one's nice. They are both me." Jamie told police that she had warned Morlin. She told him that she wanted to be stopped, that she didn't want it to go this far, but that nobody had listened. But remember, she also said that it felt good. But not because she wanted to do this again, but instead, finally someone would believe her. In her own words, "I knew I wasn't going to get better unless someone stopped me. I just didn't want to do it again." And in that moment, the young woman who had begged for help would now finally get it, but it came at the cost of another life. The courtroom was almost silent. Reporters, family members and onlookers all sat shoulder to shoulder, waiting to hear how a young woman who had warned everyone that she was dangerous would now finally be judged. Jamie Lee Dolaghy sat at a defense table. She was dressed in black, her hair in pigtails. In front of her, colored pencils and paper. Throughout much of the trial, she drew small sketches, flowers, animals, shapes. The same thing she'd been doodling since she was a child. It was as if she was trying to escape the room that she was trapped in, due to the things that she herself had done. The prosecution went first. They said that Jamie knew exactly what she was doing, that she had planned the whole thing. She chose in advance the act of violence ultimately perpetrated, the prosecutor told the jury. She engaged him in a pretense of a game. He trusted her, and she never intended to stop. He reminded the court of her internet searches. "I'm going to kill someone tonight for fun. 10 steps to commit a murder and get away with it. Then, looking towards the jury, he said, this was never a simple encounter from her point of view. Her plan was to harm this man. He was a means to an end. The defense, however, painted a very different picture. They didn't try and deny what she had done. In fact, they never tried to. Instead, they asked the jury to understand who Jamie actually was, and how she became that way. Miss Dolligy is not a murderer, her lawyer said softly. She's a profoundly damaged young person, whose mind was a torrent of terrifying thoughts and emotions. Those thoughts, not intent, caused this tragedy. The defense described her history of neglect, trauma, and the years of constant care that then suddenly disappeared when she turned 18. She spoke about her dissociation, her delusions, her desperate messages asking for help. She's not like you and me, her lawyer told the court. She was raised without love, without safety, without trust. She lives in a world that terrifies her, and she has spent her entire life trying to contain it. Over several days, forensic psychiatrists testified. They all agreed on one thing. Jamie had a profound personality disorder. One doctor described her mind as a kind of chaotic storm. Another said she had a limited capacity for empathy. But even then, they said that she wasn't incapable of remorse, and that in her own fragmented way, she was sorry. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached their decision. They found her not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter. The judge agreed that while she had planned the act, her mental illness had severely reduced her moral responsibility, and he told her, "You took the life of a person who had done nothing to harm or provoke you." One can only imagine the terror that he felt when he realized you are not going to let go. Then, in a softer tone, he added, "Your culpability is significantly reduced by your illness and the terrible deprivation you suffered as a child." The sentence, 9 years in prison. With time served, Jamie could have been eligible for parole in just over 3 years. As the judge finished reading, Jamie looked down at her hands, expressionless. In the gallery, Maureen's parents held each other and cried quietly. Outside the courthouse, his mother said, "He was our only child. We just hope no one else has to go through what we did." Inside the courtroom, the sketches that Jamie had been drawing now sat untouched. Small flowers, bright colours, a strange innocent contrast to the darkness that had actually brought her there. For Maureen's parents, time stopped on the day that their phone rang. Thousands of miles away in India, they learned that their only son had passed away in a country that he had once called his dream. His mother later said, "When they told us, the earth moved from beneath our feet. It took 12 days for his body to be returned home, and when it finally arrived, she ran her hands through his hair for hours, unable to let go. We only had one child," she said. "We are alone." In Melbourne, the story made headlines across the country. People wanted to know, how could this have happened? How could a system see all the warning signs, but still fail to stop it? Because the obvious truth is, all of the signs were there. The messages, the online posts, the digital footprint, the desperate plea from that afternoon, and the fact that the police already knew who she was. She did reach out, but nobody came. Jamie's life had been defined by chaos. One psychiatrist said that she was grossly immature in her emotional development, a child trapped inside the mind of a young adult. Justice in this case is kind of a weird one. When two worlds collided, a young man who wanted love or fun, and a young woman who just wanted help, nothing good was going to happen that night. You have to wonder, when Jamie is released, will she now receive help or be left to do something else like this? Maureen's parents still light a candle for their son, the boy who chased his dream across the world, only to meet someone who turned his dream into a nightmare. If anyone ever tells me they're a psychopath, I think I know what to do. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.